7 minutes. That's all it took to rewrite the rules of modern warfare in Africa. While France spent a decade, billions of dollars, and countless lives fighting Sahel insurgents with conventional tactics, President Traoré's forces did the impossible. They dismantled an entire terrorist network in less time than it takes to boil water. No lengthy deployments, no foreign bases, no begging Paris for permission. Just precision intelligence and speed that left Macron and Western military planners scrambling for answers. What they discovered challenges everything you think you know about African military capability. The shock isn't just tactical, it's existential. The emergence of Burkina Faso's precision-based counter-insurgency model under President Ibrahim Traoré represents a fundamental challenge to the operational assumptions that have governed Western military interventions in the Sahel for over a decade. The reported 7-minute operation near Copilogo, if substantiated through independent verification, signals not merely a tactical success, but a potential paradigm shift in how African states conceptualize sovereignty, military effectiveness, and strategic autonomy in asymmetric conflict environments. The strategic significance lies not in the brevity of the engagement itself, but in what it reveals about the evolving capacity of African military forces to design and execute operations that prioritize systemic disruption over territorial control, a departure from both colonial-era security frameworks and the protracted counter-terrorism models implemented by France's Operation Barkhane and allied regional forces. The operational doctrine attributed to Traoré's alliance of Sahel states framework fundamentally inverts the resource calculus that has historically favored external military actors in African theaters. Traditional Western counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel have relied on extensive logistical footprints, forward operating bases, intelligence fusion centers staffed by foreign personnel, and sustained air superiority maintained through costly platforms. These deployments, while technologically sophisticated, created dependencies that local governments could neither replicate nor sustain independently, effectively institutionalizing a security relationship that critics have characterized as neo-colonial in structure, if not intent. The AES model, by contrast, appears designed around the exploitation of tactical intelligence, drone-enabled precision targeting, and highly mobile ground units capable of rapid insertion and extraction. This approach minimizes the defender's advantage typically enjoyed by insurgent forces operating in familiar terrain with dispersed command structures, instead compelling them to concentrate resources at critical nodes, supply depots, financing hubs, fuel storage, communication centers, that become vulnerable to precision strikes once identified through intelligence penetration. The psychological dimension of this operational model warrants particular attention from regional analysts and security planners. Insurgent groups operating across the Lip-Toko-Gurma region have historically relied on their ability to outlast conventional military responses, dispersing after engagements and reconstituting in areas beyond effective government control. The tempo and precision of operations like the Copilogo strike, if replicable across multiple theaters simultaneously, fundamentally undermines this strategic patience. When critical infrastructure can be identified and eliminated in minutes, rather than through prolonged ground operations, the calculus of insurgent logistics shifts dramatically. Fuel convoys become liabilities rather than assets. Centralized ammunition storage creates catastrophic single points of failure. Command hierarchies that require physical proximity for coordination expose leadership to decapitation strikes. The operational signature of the AES approach suggests an intelligence apparatus capable of penetrating insurgent networks at multiple levels, identifying patterns of movement and supply that enable predictive targeting rather than reactive pursuit. The geopolitical ramifications of this doctrinal evolution extend well beyond Burkina Faso's borders and directly challenge French strategic interests across Francophone Africa. Paris has justified its military presence in the Sahel for over a decade through a narrative framework that positioned French forces as indispensable guarantors of regional stability against jihadist expansion. The declared withdrawal of Operation Barkhane, accelerated by diplomatic ruptures with Mali and subsequently Burkina Faso, was framed by French officials as a strategic reorientation rather than a forced exit. with continued counter-terrorism cooperation supposedly maintained through Niger and other willing partners. However, the operational effectiveness demonstrated by Traoré's forces undermines the core premise of French indispensability. If Burkinabe units, supported by non-Western partners and leveraging commercially available drone technology, can achieve decisive tactical results previously attributed to French air power and intelligence capabilities, the political justification for France's security architecture in the region collapses. Macron's government now confronts a narrative challenge wherein African states are not merely rejecting French military presence due to sovereignty concerns or anti-colonial sentiment, but are demonstrating viable alternative security models that question whether French intervention was ever optimized for African strategic interests rather than French geopolitical positioning. The regional implications of this doctrinal shift ripple across the alliance of Sahel states membership and beyond. Mali, under Colonel Assimi Goïta's transitional government, has similarly pivoted toward alternative security partnerships, most notably with Russian military contractors and advisors. Niger, despite the democratic coup that removed President Mohamed Bazoum in July 2023, has signaled alignment with AES security priorities, even as its diplomatic positioning remains more nuanced regarding Western engagement. The operational success attributed to Burkina Faso's forces provides political validation for these strategic reorientations, potentially accelerating the consolidation of an alternative security bloc in West Africa that explicitly rejects French military tutelage. For the economic community of West African states, this creates profound tensions. ECOWAS, long dominated by Francophone members closely aligned with Paris, has struggled to craft a coherent response to the cascade of military takeovers across the Sahel, particularly as the putschist governments enjoy significant domestic popularity precisely because of their anti-French positioning. The demonstrated military effectiveness of AES forces complicates any regional pressure campaign aimed at restoration of civilian rule, as the transitional authorities can point to tangible security improvements as justification for extended timelines. The economic dimensions of this security model deserve careful examination, particularly regarding resource sovereignty and the financing of military modernization. Burkina Faso remains one of the world's leading gold producers, yet artisanal and industrial mining operations have historically operated under concessionary frameworks negotiated during periods of greater external influence. Traoré's government has initiated reviews of mining contracts and foreign concessions, seeking to redirect resource revenues toward domestic development priorities, including military procurement and intelligence infrastructure. The capacity to finance indigenous security capabilities without reliance on foreign military assistance programs fundamentally alters the leverage dynamics between African governments and external partners. France's historical influence in Francophone Africa has been maintained not solely through military presence, but through interlocking systems of currency control via the CFA franc, preferential trade agreements, and development assistance conditioned on political alignment. When an African government can secure its territory, generate domestic revenue through resource extraction, and procure military capabilities from diverse international suppliers, the traditional tools of French influence lose much of their coercive power. The technological aspects of the AES operational model raise important questions about the democratization of precision strike capabilities and the evolving character of asymmetric warfare globally. The drone systems employed in the Geopolitical operation, while not publicly specified, likely represent commercially available or modified platforms rather than cutting-edge military-grade systems requiring extensive foreign technical support. China, Turkey, and other emerging defense manufacturers have made reconnaissance and armed drone systems increasingly accessible to mid-tier militaries at price points substantially below Western equivalents. This proliferation of precision strike technology enables tactical innovations previously reserved for states with advanced aerospace industries and satellite reconnaissance networks. The integration of such systems with human intelligence networks, signals intercepts, and pattern-of-life analysis allows forces like Burkina Faso's to compress the targeting cycle from intelligence collection to strike execution in ways that mirror American counterterrorism operations, albeit at smaller scale and with more limited technical sophistication. The strategic implication is that technological barriers to effective counterinsurgency operations are lowering, reducing African dependence on Western intelligence sharing and precision strike capabilities that have historically come with political strings attached. However, serious analytical caution is warranted regarding the sustainability and scalability of this operational model beyond high-profile tactical successes. A 7-minute strike against a concentrated insurgent position, while tactically impressive, does not constitute a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy capable of addressing the underlying drivers of instability across the Sahel. The region faces interlocking crises of governance, climate change, demographic pressure, ethnic marginalization, and economic exclusion that cannot be resolved through kinetic operations, regardless of their precision or speed. Insurgent groups including Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin and Islamic State in the Greater Sahara have proven remarkably resilient precisely because they exploit genuine grievances within communities that perceive central governments as predatory, corrupt, or ethnically exclusive. Military pressure that is not accompanied by credible governance reforms, equitable resource distribution, and inclusive political processes risks achieving tactical victories, while allowing insurgencies to reconstitute in areas where state presence remains tenuous or illegitimate. The governance record of the Traore administration presents a complex picture that complicates assessment of long-term stability prospects. Since seizing power in September 2022, Traore has consolidated authority through a combination of nationalist rhetoric, promises of security sector reform, and suppression of political opposition and independent media. The suspension of the constitutional order, postponement of elections, and restrictions on civil society organizations raise fundamental questions about the political trajectory Burkina Faso is following. History demonstrates that military governments that achieve initial security gains often struggle to institutionalize those successes into sustainable governance frameworks, particularly when concentrated executive power inhibits the development of checks and balances necessary for responsive administration. The risk is that tactical military effectiveness becomes a substitute for genuine political reform, creating conditions where security gains prove temporary as underlying grievances fester and new forms of resistance emerge. The international partnership landscape surrounding the AES security model warrants careful scrutiny, particularly regarding Russian engagement in the Sahel. While public reporting on Russian military advisory roles in Burkina Faso remains less comprehensive than in Mali, where Wagner Group contractors have been widely documented, the strategic alignment between AES members in Moscow is evident through diplomatic positioning at the United Nations, procurement patterns, and information operations. Russia's approach to African security partnerships differs fundamentally from Western models in its explicit rejection of conditionality regarding governance, human rights, or democratic transitions. This creates attractive optionality for military governments seeking to consolidate power without external pressure for civilian oversight or electoral timelines. However, the Russian security sector support model, particularly as delivered through private military contractors, has demonstrated severe limitations in contexts like the Central African Republic and Mali, where tactical gains have proven difficult to sustain and allegations of human rights abuses have generated their own cycles of instability and international isolation. The information environment surrounding the Geopolitical operation and similar AES military successes deserves analytical attention, as narratives of tactical prowess serve important political functions beyond their operational significance. State media in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have aggressively promoted narratives of military effectiveness and strategic autonomy, often contrasting recent successes with the perceived failures of French-backed operations over the previous decade. These narratives resonate powerfully with domestic populations frustrated by years of insecurity and resentful of what is perceived as neo-colonial French interference. However, independent verification of operational claims remains limited, as foreign journalists face significant restrictions and local civil society organizations operate under increasing pressure. The 7-minute operational timeline, the precision of intelligence that enabled the strike, and the complete dismantling of insurgent networks without apparent civilian casualties or collateral damage all merit skeptical examination absent corroborating evidence from independent sources. Military governments have powerful incentives to exaggerate successes and minimize setbacks, particularly when domestic legitimacy rests substantially on security performance. The regional security architecture implications of the AES consolidation extend beyond immediate counter-terrorism operations to broader questions of continental peace and security frameworks. The African Union's normative prohibition against unconstitutional changes of government, codified in various declarations and protocols, has been systematically violated across the Sahel without meaningful continental response mechanisms. The demonstrated capacity of military governments to deliver security results, or at least credibly claim such results, complicates the AU's ability to enforce democratic norms when publics in affected countries appear willing to trade electoral governance for improved security conditions. This creates precedent effects across the continent, where military officers observing events in the Sahel may calculate that international isolation following coups will prove temporary and manageable, particularly if security improvements can be demonstrated and alternative international partnerships secured. The erosion of continental democratic norms in favor of stability-focused pragmatism represents a significant regression from the governance progress documented across Africa over the previous 2 decades, with implications that extend well beyond the immediate Sahel theater. The economic trajectory of Burkina Faso under conditions of international isolation and realigned partnerships merits ongoing monitoring, as security gains prove hollow if they cannot be translated into development outcomes that address citizen grievances. International financial institutions, bilateral donors, and development agencies have suspended or reduced assistance in response to the unconstitutional government change, creating fiscal pressures even as security operations demand increased expenditure. The government's capacity to sustain military modernization, pay security forces adequately, and provide basic services in newly secured areas depends critically on revenue generation and economic management under challenging external conditions. Resource nationalism, while politically popular and potentially justified on equity grounds, can create tensions with international mining companies whose capital, expertise, and market access remain important for maximizing extraction revenues. The challenge for any government, military or civilian, is balancing sovereignty imperatives with the practical requirements of economic development in a globalized system where isolation carries substantial costs. The humanitarian dimensions of the security crisis in Burkina Faso continue to deteriorate despite claimed military successes, with over 2 million internally displaced persons and severe food insecurity affecting millions more. Precision military operations that disrupt insurgent networks do not automatically translate into conditions permitting displaced populations to return home, resume agricultural production, and access basic services. The restoration of state authority in previously contested areas requires not only the physical presence of security forces, but functioning administration, service delivery, judicial systems, and economic opportunities that address the conditions that made insurgent messaging attractive to marginalized communities. The capacity of the Traore government to extend effective governance into areas cleared of insurgent presence remains largely undemonstrated, as military control does not equate to political legitimacy or administrative capacity. Observers should monitor whether tactical military gains are being consolidated through governance investments or whether cleared areas risk becoming unstable as security forces move to new priority theaters. From a continental perspective, the evolution of indigenous African military capabilities and strategic thinking represents a potentially positive development if it can be channeled toward accountable, rights-respecting security sectors embedded within democratic governance frameworks. African states have legitimate grievances regarding the effectiveness and appropriateness of externally designed security assistance programs that often prioritize donor concerns over recipient needs and create dependencies that undermine sovereignty and institutional development. The technological and operational innovations attributed to the AES framework, if they can be verified and prove sustainable, demonstrate that African military forces can design and execute sophisticated operations when properly resourced, led, and motivated. The challenge is ensuring that such capabilities serve constitutional governments accountable to their populations rather than becoming instruments of regime survival for military authorities resistant to civilian oversight and democratic transitions. Policymakers in Western capitals, international organizations, and regional bodies must grapple with the reality that the security landscape in the Sahel has fundamentally shifted in ways that cannot be reversed through diplomatic pressure or conditional assistance. The demonstrated effectiveness of alternative security models, whether genuinely transformative or primarily rhetorical, has created political space for governments to reject traditional partnerships and pursue different strategic alignments. The appropriate response is not nostalgic attachment to security frameworks that African states have explicitly rejected, but rather serious engagement with the legitimate sovereignty concerns, capacity-building needs, and political aspirations that drive such strategic reorientations. This requires acknowledging past failures, recognizing the diversity of security challenges across African contexts, and offering partnership models that respect African agency while maintaining necessary standards regarding human rights, civilian protection, and democratic governance. The strategic question confronting France and other Western actors is whether the Sahel transition represents a temporary alignment of convenience between military governments and authoritarian external partners, or a more fundamental reconfiguration of security relationships that will persist regardless of eventual political transitions. If the former, patience and maintenance of diplomatic channels may eventually enable renewed partnership under different political conditions. If the latter, continued attempts to isolate or pressure AES governments risk accelerating their integration into alternative geopolitical blocs, while foreclosing opportunities for constructive engagement on shared counterterrorism interests. The 7-minute operation near Kopologo, whatever its operational reality, serves as a symbolic marker of African military confidence and strategic autonomy that Western policymakers ignore at the risk of prolonged irrelevance in a region where vital interests regarding migration, terrorism, and resource security remain substantially engaged. Looking forward, the sustainability of the AES security model depends critically on factors that remain uncertain and contested. Can precision operations scale across the vast, undergoverned territories where insurgent groups operate? Will governments invest security gains in governance, reforms necessary for long-term stability? Can alternative international partnerships provide the sustained support required for capacity building without creating new dependencies? Will populations continue to tolerate military rule if security improvements prove fleeting or come at the cost of political freedoms and economic stagnation? These questions cannot be answered definitively based on current evidence, but they frame the analytical challenges that observers of Sahelian security dynamics must navigate in coming months and years. What appears certain is that the strategic assumptions that governed Western engagement in the region for the past decade no longer hold, and the emergence of indigenous operational doctrines, whatever their ultimate effectiveness, marks a genuine inflection point in how African states conceptualize security, sovereignty, and international partnership in an era of great power competition and declining Western influence.